During a family trip, my son pulled over and left me at a gas station. My daughter-in-law just laughed. That same day, I secretly sold their house. My phone rang 37 times. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Margaret, and at 64 I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I lost my husband 3 years ago to cancer, watched him fade away in that hospital bed while holding his hand. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what my own son would do to me on that October afternoon. David had called me the week before. His voice unusually warm. "Mom, Jessica and I want to take you on a little road trip. You've been cooped up in that house too long since Dad died. It'll be good for you." His concern seemed genuine, and my heart swelled with hope. Maybe my daughter-in-law was finally warming up to me. Maybe we could be a real family again. I spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, something that wouldn't embarrass them. I even bought Jessica those expensive chocolates she mentioned liking once. When they picked me up that Saturday morning, I climbed into the backseat of their SUV with a smile I hadn't worn in months. "Where are we headed?" I asked, settling in with my small purse and a bottle of water. "Just a scenic drive upstate," David said, catching my eyes in the rearview mirror. "You'll love it, Mom." For 2 hours we drove through beautiful countryside. I watched the fall leaves blur past my window, feeling lighter than I had since Robert's funeral. Jessica was unusually quiet, but I attributed it to her being tired. David kept making small talk about work, the weather, normal things that felt like a balm to my lonely heart. Then we stopped at a gas station. It was one of those isolated places you see on back roads, with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds growing through the cracks, and the only other car was an old pickup truck that had seen better days. "I need to use the restroom," David announced, pulling up next to the far pump. "Jessica, you coming?" She nodded, not looking at me. "Yeah, I'll be right back." "I'll just wait here," I said, though something felt strange. There was tension in the air I couldn't name, like the electricity before a storm. They both got out, and I watched them walk toward the building. David's hand was on Jessica's lower back, guiding her, and they were walking faster than necessary. I rolled down my window slightly, enjoying the crisp autumn air. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. I checked my watch. They'd been gone 15 minutes. The restrooms couldn't possibly take that long. I craned my neck to see if they were browsing in the store, maybe buying snacks for the road. That's when I heard it. The sound of an engine starting. Not just any engine. David's SUV engine. But I was sitting in David's SUV. I turned around in confusion, and my blood ran cold. There was David behind the wheel of a second car, one I hadn't noticed when we arrived. Jessica was in the passenger seat, and she was looking directly at me through my window. She was smiling. Not a kind smile. A cold, satisfied smile that made my stomach lurch. I fumbled for the door handle, my heart beginning to race. "David!" I called out, stumbling out of the SUV. "David, wait!" But he was already backing out. I ran toward their car, waving my arms, panic rising in my throat like bile. "Stop! Please stop!" Jessica rolled down her window as they paused at the edge of the parking lot. "Maybe this will teach you not to be such a burden, Margaret," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the empty space. Then she actually laughed. A cruel, delighted laugh that would haunt my dreams for weeks to come. I stood there in my good shoes and my carefully chosen sweater, watching my son's car disappear down the highway. The SUV they'd abandoned was theirs too. But as I frantically searched through it, I realized why they'd left it behind. It was out of gas. Completely empty. My purse was still in the back seat, but when I checked it, my wallet was gone. Just gone. The reality hit me like a physical blow. My own son had planned this. They had brought me here specifically to abandon me, taking my money and leaving me stranded 60 miles from home with no way to contact anyone. My phone was dead, the car was useless, and the sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. I walked to the store on shaking legs, hoping to find help, but a handwritten sign on the door read, "Closed for family emergency." The gas station was automated, requiring a credit card I no longer had access to. Standing there in that empty parking lot as the first stars appeared overhead, I felt something die inside me. Not just hope, but something deeper. The last remnants of my faith in family, in love, in the idea that being a devoted mother meant anything at all. The night air was getting cold and I had nowhere to go. The first night was the longest of my life. I found a narrow bench outside the closed gas station store, but it was meant for someone half my size. My back ached against the metal armrest, and the October wind cut right through my sweater. Every time a car passed on the highway, I would wave desperately, but no one stopped. Why would they? A woman my age sitting outside a closed gas station at night probably looked like trouble. By 3 in the morning I was shivering so hard my teeth chattered. I kept thinking David would come back. Surely this was just a cruel joke, a momentary lapse in judgment. He would realize what he'd done and return for me. But as the hours crawled by and the highway grew quieter, that hope died a slow, cold death. When the sun finally rose, my whole body ached. My throat was raw from the dry air, and I hadn't slept more than a few minutes at a time. The gas station opened at 6, and a young man with kind eyes immediately noticed my condition. "Ma'am, are you okay? Have you been out here all night?" The concern in his voice almost broke me. I tried to explain without sounding completely pathetic, but how do you tell a stranger that your own family abandoned you like a stray dog? He let me use the station phone to call a taxi, though I had to promise the driver I could pay when we reached my house. During that hour-long ride home, I stared out the window at the familiar landscape and felt like a different person than the one who'd left yesterday morning. The woman who'd climbed into David's SUV with chocolates for her daughter-in-law was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone whose son could look her in the eye and drive away. I paid the taxi driver with money from my emergency stash hidden in my bedroom dresser, then stood in my empty house feeling more alone than I had even in those dark days after Robert's death. At least when Robert was dying, I knew he loved me. I knew that every labored breath and every weak smile was filled with 37 years of real affection. This was different. This was the crushing realization that I had devoted my entire adult life to raising a son who could abandon me without a flicker of remorse. I called David's house phone that afternoon, my hands shaking as I dialed. It went straight to the answering machine. His cell phone was turned off. Jessica's phone was disconnected. They had planned this thoroughly, down to cutting off communication, so I couldn't even ask why. The next few days blurred together. I barely ate, couldn't sleep, and found myself replaying every moment of David's childhood, searching for signs I'd missed. Had I spoiled him too much? Been too lenient? I remembered staying up all night when he had pneumonia at 8 years old, holding him while he coughed and wheezed. I remembered working double shifts at the diner to pay for his college tuition when Robert's construction business hit a rough patch. I remembered the house I'd given them. After Robert died, I'd signed over the deed to our second property, a beautiful 3-bedroom home we'd bought as an investment when David graduated college. "This is for your future," I'd told them at the signing. "I want you to have security." Jessica had hugged me that day, tears in her eyes, calling me the most generous mother-in-law in the world. Now I wondered if she'd been laughing inside even then. A week after the abandonment, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee when it hit me. The house was still technically mine for another 30 days while the paperwork processed. I'd given it to them out of love, wanting to help them build their life together. But love was clearly a one-way street in this family. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the folder with all the property documents. There, in black and white, was the truth. The transfer hadn't been finalized yet. Due to some bureaucratic delay at the county office, I was still the legal owner for another 3 weeks. For the first time since that horrible night at the gas station, I felt something other than despair. I felt something that scared me a little, but also energized me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I felt powerful. Sitting there surrounded by legal documents, I realized that David and Jessica had made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed I would suffer in silence, that I would absorb their cruelty the way I'd absorbed so many smaller cruelties over the years. They thought they knew me. They were wrong. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a real estate agent. The second was to a lawyer. The third was to the county office to put a hold on the property transfer. If my son wanted to teach me lessons about family loyalty, I had one to teach him too. The real estate agent, Linda Morrison, was a woman about my age with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I explained my situation, carefully leaving out the more humiliating details, She leaned back in her chair and studied me. "You want to sell a house you gave to your son?" she asked, her voice neutral but her expression knowing. "The transfer hasn't been finalized yet," I said, spreading the documents across her desk. "Legally, it's still mine for another 2 weeks." Linda examined the paperwork with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen family drama play out in property disputes before. "This is all legitimate," she finally said. "The house could be on the market by tomorrow if you're serious about this." "I'm serious." She quoted me a price that made my eyes widen. The neighborhood had appreciated significantly since Robert, and I bought the house 15 years ago. What we'd paid $180,000 for was now worth nearly $400,000. "How quickly could we close?" I asked. "With the right buyer and a cash offer? 2 weeks, maybe less." I signed the listing agreement that afternoon. That evening, I sat in Robert's old recliner, the one I'd been meaning to donate but couldn't bring myself to part with, and really thought about what I was doing. This wasn't just about the money or even about teaching David a lesson. This was about reclaiming something I'd lost along the way. Something that had been eroded so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was almost gone. My self-respect. I'd spent 3 years since Robert's death trying to be the perfect mother and grandmother-in-law, bending over backward to maintain relationships with people who clearly didn't value me. I'd listened to Jessica's subtle criticisms of my cooking, my clothes, my old-fashioned ideas about family. I'd bitten my tongue when David forgot my birthday but never missed Jessica's. I'd convinced myself that keeping peace was worth more than keeping my dignity. The gas station had shattered that illusion. In that moment when Jessica rolled down the window to deliver her parting shot, I'd seen the truth. I wasn't a beloved family member to them. I was an obligation they'd grown tired of carrying. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed David's number, and for a split second my heart leaped. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. "Mom." His voice sounded strained. "I've been trying to reach you." "Have you?" I kept my voice level. "I've been here. Look, about the other day I can explain." "Can you?" "Please do." I waited, genuinely curious to hear what possible explanation he could offer. There was a long pause. "Jessica was having a panic attack. We had to rush her to the hospital. In all the confusion, we forgot you were in the other car." The lie was so smooth, so practiced that I almost admired it. Almost. "Which hospital?" I asked quietly. Another pause. "What? Which hospital did you rush her to? I'd like to send flowers." "She's fine now. She's resting." "David." I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly very tired. Jessica wasn't having a panic attack. She rolled down the window and told me this would teach me not to be such a burden. She laughed. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You must have misheard," he finally said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "I didn't mishear anything. You planned this. You brought me to that gas station specifically to abandon me, and you took my wallet to make sure I couldn't get home easily." "Mom, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" "Then explain why my wallet was missing from my purse." He couldn't. We both knew he couldn't. "I think," I said carefully, "that we need some time apart. Some space to figure out what kind of relationship we really have." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done pretending that treating me like garbage is acceptable behavior. It means I'm done being grateful for scraps of attention from my own son." "You're overreacting." "It was a misunderstanding." I hung up. An hour later, Jessica called. I let it go to voicemail. Then David called again. Voicemail. Then a number I didn't recognize, probably one of their friends calling on their behalf. I turned off the phone. The next morning, Linda called with news that made my coffee taste sweeter than it had in months. "We have 3 serious inquiries already," she said. "One is a cash buyer who wants to close next week. They're offering full asking price." I was quiet for so long that Linda asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I said. "Accept the offer." That afternoon, I drove past the house that had caused so much trouble. David's car was in the driveway, and I could see him through the kitchen window, probably having lunch and planning his future in the home his generous mother had provided. I parked across the street and sat there for a few minutes, remembering all the dreams Robert and I had shared about this place. We'd imagined family dinners here, maybe grandchildren playing in the backyard someday. We talked about how wonderful it would be to give David and his wife such a head start in life. Those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to David. Enjoy the house while you can. Then I drove home to pack for the vacation I was going to take with the money from the sale. The closing took place on a Thursday morning in a sterile conference room that smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet. I sat across from the buyers, a young couple with a baby who reminded me painfully of David and Jessica 20 years ago, full of hope and plans for their future. As I signed my name on the final document, officially transferring ownership of the house that was supposed to be David's inheritance, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a deep, quiet peace that settled into my bones like warmth after a long winter. The check was deposited into my account that afternoon. $387,000 after fees and commissions. More money than I'd ever had access to at one time. Money that represented not just financial security but something more important. Proof that I still had choices. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of the good wine Robert had been saving for a special occasion, watching the sunset through windows I'd cleaned that morning. My house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. I was halfway through my wine when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Then another. Through the front window, I could see David's SUV, the same one they'd abandoned at the gas station. He was storming up my front walk with Jessica close behind, her face twisted with an emotion I'd never seen there before. Panic. The doorbell rang once, then immediately started ringing repeatedly as David held his finger on the button. Then came the pounding. Mom! Open the door. We need to talk to you right now. I took another sip of wine and stayed in my chair. Margaret! Jessica's voice was shrill, all pretense of civility gone. We know you're in there. Open this door. The pounding got louder. I heard David's voice tight with barely controlled fury. What the hell did you do? What did you do to our house? Our house. Even now, even after what they'd done, he still considered it theirs. I walked to the front door but didn't open it. The house was sold this morning. I called through the wood. The new owner should be moving in next week. You can't do that. Jessica screamed. That's our house. You gave it to us. I changed my mind. You can't change your mind. We have the paperwork. Actually, you don't. The transfer was never finalized. I put a stop to it last week. There was a moment of silence, then David's voice, low and dangerous. Open this door, Mom. We're going to settle this right now. No, we're not. And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'm calling the police. You're making a huge mistake, Jessica hissed. You think you're punishing us, but you're destroying your whole family. David is your only son. We're all you have. I closed my eyes, remembering that moment at the gas station when I'd understood exactly how little I meant to them. You're wrong, I said quietly. I have myself. That's more than I had last week. The pounding started again, harder this time. Something rattled. They were trying the door handle. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I need police assistance, I told the dispatcher calmly. My son and his wife are trying to break into my house and they're threatening me. The pounding stopped immediately. Apparently they could hear me through the door. Mom, you don't want to do this, David said, but his voice had lost its edge. Think about what you're doing. Think about our family. I have thought about it. I've thought about very little else for the past 2 weeks. I heard them whispering urgently to each other, then footsteps moving away from the door. A few minutes later, the SUV started up and pulled out of my driveway. The police arrived 10 minutes after that. Officer Martinez was thorough and professional, taking down all the details and walking around my house to check for any damage. He found none, but the attempted break-in was documented in case there were future incidents. Do you feel safe staying here tonight? He asked as he prepared to leave. I considered the question seriously. Did I feel safe? For the first time in months, the answer was yes. I do. After he left, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat back down to watch the last of the sunset. My phone had been buzzing with text messages throughout the confrontation, but I'd ignored them. Now I scrolled through them, David's desperation evident in each increasingly frantic message. Mom, please call me. We can work this out. This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. Jessica is crying. You're destroying our marriage. I'll pay you back every penny. Just tell me how to fix this. Please don't do this to us. Please. The last message had come in just 5 minutes ago. Why are you doing this? I'm your son. I stared at that message for a long time, remembering a little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, who brought me dandelions he'd picked from the yard and called them flowers. That little boy had grown into a man who could abandon his mother at a gas station and sleep soundly afterward. I typed back a single sentence. You stopped being my son the moment you drove away and left me there. Then I blocked his number. I did the same with Jessica's number, and with the landline at the house that was no longer theirs. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd climbed into David's SUV 2 weeks ago. Older maybe, but stronger. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like self-respect. Tomorrow I decided I would start planning that vacation. I thought blocking their numbers would give me peace, but I'd underestimated their desperation. They found other ways. It started with David's co-workers calling on his behalf. Then Jessica's sister, whom I'd met exactly twice in 15 years, left a tearful voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart. Old family friends began reaching out, people who clearly had only heard one side of the story. Margaret, dear, David is beside himself, said Helen Murphy, Robert's cousin who lived 3 states away. He says there's been some terrible misunderstanding about a house? Surely you two can work this out. I listened to these messages with a mixture of sadness and amazement. David and Jessica had launched a full campaign, painting themselves as victims of their cruel, vindictive mother. In their version, I'd stolen their house in a fit of senile rage over some minor family disagreement. The breaking point came when Pastor Williams from the church I'd attended with Robert called personally. Margaret, I'm concerned about you, he said, his voice heavy with pastoral authority. David came to see me yesterday. He's very worried about your mental state. My mental state? Of course. Pastor Williams, did David tell you what happened? The actual events that led to this situation? He mentioned that you felt slighted during a family outing, and that you're not thinking clearly since Robert's passing. Grief can make us do things we don't mean, Margaret. I closed my eyes, feeling something crack inside my chest. Even the church, the place where I'd found comfort after Robert's death, had been turned against me. Pastor, my son abandoned me at a gas station 60 miles from home. He took my wallet and left me there overnight with no way to get home. There was a pause. I'm sure there's more to the story than that. There isn't. And if David told you I'm mentally unfit, ask him why he didn't call Adult Protective Services or try to get me medical help. Ask him why his solution was to take a house worth $400,000. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, as I was making dinner for one in my quiet kitchen, my new phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Mom. David's voice, broken and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. He must have borrowed someone else's phone. Please don't hang up. Please just listen to me for 1 minute. I didn't hang up, but I didn't speak either. We're losing everything, he said, and I could hear him crying. The apartment we're renting month to month costs more than we can afford without the house. Jessica lost her job last week because she's been too upset to focus. We're going to be homeless. Still, I said nothing. I know what we did was wrong. I know it was terrible. But we panicked, okay? Jessica's been struggling with depression, and she convinced me you'd be better off without us constantly disappointing you. She said we should just make a clean break. It was a good story. I almost believed it myself. The gas station thing wasn't planned, he continued. We were going to drive you home. But then Jessica had a breakdown in the bathroom and said she couldn't face you. We thought you'd call someone or take a cab. We didn't know you didn't have your wallet. Because you took it. Jessica took it by mistake. She grabbed the wrong purse when we were switching cars. By mistake. Even now, even when he was begging, he couldn't tell the truth. David, I said quietly. Jessica looked me in the eye and told me this would teach me not to be such a burden. She laughed. That wasn't a mistake. Silence. She's not well, Mom. She needs help. But I can't get her help if we're living in our car. That's not my problem anymore. You're my mother. The desperation in his voice was raw now, primal. You brought me into this world. You can't just abandon me. The irony was so sharp it took my breath away. I can't abandon you? I'm sorry. We're both sorry. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. Do you want me to grovel? Do you want me to get on my knees? I'll do it. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I do understand. I've learned my lesson. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. Help us. I thought about the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, who trusted me to make everything better. But that little boy was gone, had been gone for years. The man on the phone was a stranger who'd used my love as a weapon against me. Goodbye, David. Mom, wait. I hung up and immediately blocked the number he'd called from. Over the next week, my phone rang 37 times. Different numbers, but I knew it was them. Friends of friends, distant relatives, anyone they could convince to call on their behalf. I stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. The voicemails became increasingly desperate. Jessica, sobbing about how she'd made a terrible mistake and just wanted her family back. David's boss, suggesting I might want to reconsider since David's work performance was suffering. Jessica's mother, a woman who'd never bothered to acknowledge my existence before, suddenly very concerned about family unity. But the one that almost broke my resolve came from a number I recognized. My sister Mary, who lived in Florida and only called on birthdays and major holidays. Maggie. Her voice was tight with disapproval. What's this nonsense about you stealing some house from David? He called me crying, said you've lost your mind since Robert died. Now, I know grief does funny things to people, but this is going too far. That boy worships you. Fix this mess before you do something you can't take back. Even my own sister had turned against me without asking for my side of the story. I sat in Robert's recliner that night, holding his picture and wishing he were there to tell me I was doing the right thing. He'd loved David, but he'd also seen through Jessica's manipulations in ways I'd been too hopeful to acknowledge. She's poison, he'd said once after a particularly tense family dinner. Mark my words, Maggie. That woman will destroy this family if we let her. I defended her then, made excuses, tried to keep peace. Robert had died before he could see how right he'd been. The 37th call came at midnight. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was different this time. It was David, but his voice was cold now, empty of the desperate pleading. You win, Mom. I hope you're happy. I hope that house money was worth losing your son forever. Don't ever expect to see me again. Don't expect to meet your grandchildren someday. You've made your choice and I've made mine. I played the message 3 times, waiting to feel guilt or regret or the crushing need to call him back. Instead, I felt relief. The war was finally over. 3 months after David's final voicemail, I was sitting on the balcony of a beachfront condo in Sarasota, watching dolphins play in the surf while my morning coffee grew cold in my hands. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. I'd used part of the house money to rent this place for the winter, something Robert and I had always talked about doing but never could afford. Now I had both the means and the freedom to do exactly what I wanted, when I wanted, without consulting anyone or worrying about anyone else's opinion. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first weeks after blocking David's number had been hard in ways I hadn't expected. 41 years of motherhood doesn't just switch off because your child proves unworthy of it. I'd wake up some mornings reaching for my phone to call him, forgetting for a moment that I no longer had a son. But gradually, the habit of worrying about David and Jessica faded. I stopped checking my phone constantly, stopped jumping at every sound that might be them at my door. I started sleeping through the night again. The real healing began when I met Eleanor at the community center back home. She was leading a support group for women dealing with difficult family situations, and something about her calm strength drew me in. During my first meeting, listening to other women share stories of ungrateful children, manipulative relatives, and toxic family dynamics, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the monster David and Jessica had painted me to be in their campaign for sympathy. You know what the hardest part is? Said a woman named Carol whose daughter had stolen her identity to open credit cards. It's not the money they took or even the betrayal. It's grieving for the relationship you thought you had. That's exactly what it was. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my son. I was mourning the illusion that he'd ever truly loved me the way I'd loved him. Eleanor became my friend, then my confidant, then something like a sister. She was 72, had raised 4 children, and had cut ties with 2 of them years ago for similar reasons. People think motherhood is sacred, she told me one afternoon as we walked through the botanical gardens. They think it's supposed to be unconditional. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided, Margaret. And children aren't supposed to torture their parents just because they can. Through Eleanor, I met other women who'd chosen themselves over toxic family members. Women who'd stopped enabling, stopped sacrificing, stopped setting themselves on fire to keep ungrateful relatives warm. We started having weekly dinners, taking day trips, planning adventures that would have been impossible when I was constantly worried about David's needs and feelings. I learned to garden from Susan, whose son had tried to have her declared incompetent so he could access her retirement funds. I learned to paint watercolors from Beth, whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years over a perceived slight at a wedding. I learned that strength sometimes looks like walking away, and peace sometimes requires disappointing people who never really cared about your happiness anyway. The money from the house sale wasn't just giving me financial security. It was giving me choices I'd never had before. I bought a reliable new car, updated my wardrobe, got my hair done at an expensive salon instead of the discount place I'd been using for years. Small things, but they added up to something larger: self-respect. I also started traveling, something Robert and I had always planned to do after he retired. I visited my cousin in Oregon, took a painting class in Tuscany, spent 2 weeks exploring New England's fall foliage. Each trip made me stronger, more confident in my own company. The condo in Sarasota was my latest adventure. I'd rented it for 3 months, planning to decide at the end whether to buy something permanent in Florida or return to Ohio. Either way, it would be my choice, made for my reasons. I was reading on the balcony that afternoon when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Mrs. Henderson? The voice was young, uncertain. Yes. This is Tyler Morrison. I work with David at the insurance company. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice level. What can I do for you, Tyler? David doesn't know I'm calling. But I thought you should know he's been drinking a lot at work. He got fired last week. And Jessica, she's not handling things well. I waited for him to continue. The thing is, Mrs. Henderson, I heard David's version of what happened with you in the house, but it never made sense to me. So I did some digging, and I found out about the gas station thing. My heart began to race. A friend of mine works there part-time. He was there that night, saw you waiting outside for hours. He said you looked really scared and confused. I closed my eyes, remembering that endless cold night. I just wanted you to know that some of us figured out David was lying. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for what they did to you. My grandmother raised me, and if anyone ever did that to her. His voice trailed off. Thank you for calling, Tyler. That means more than you know. Are you okay? Are you somewhere safe and happy? I looked out at the dolphins playing in the surf, felt the warm Florida sun on my face, thought about the dinner I was planning with Eleanor when I got back to Ohio next month. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. I'm very okay. After Tyler hung up, I sat for a long time watching the ocean. There was a part of me that felt sad for David, wherever he was now, whatever mess he'd made of his life. But it was a distant sadness, like sympathy for a stranger's troubles. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have taken my breath away a year ago. Now beauty like this was becoming routine, part of a life lived on my own terms. I thought about the woman who'd climbed into David's SUV that October morning, trusting and hopeful and so desperately wanting to be loved. That woman was gone, and I didn't miss her. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew the difference between love and exploitation, someone who understood that you can't force people to value you, but you can refuse to tolerate their contempt. My phone had been silent for weeks now. No more desperate calls, no more flying monkeys sent to guilt me into reconciliation. David and Jessica had finally accepted that their ATM was permanently out of service. As the stars began to appear over the Gulf of Mexico, I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to the woman I'd become and the life I'd chosen. It wasn't the life I'd planned 40 years ago when I first held my newborn son, but it was mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was enough.